Welcome, witches, wizards, and muggles alike, to another enchanting episode of Magical Tales from the Slytherin Common Room, bringing your favorite Harry Potter fanfiction to audio format. So sit back, relax, and lock your headphones and let the magic begin. Apostasy by Deydralinne. Chapter 44. Meddlesome Fools. Hermione held the pillow up behind Daphne as Pansy helped her into their bed. "Hey, baby." Daphne looked innocently up at Pansy. "Do we have any cinnamon ripple ice cream?" Pansy stroked Daphne's cheeks. "I'll go check." Daphne's eyes followed her as she left the room, pulling the door closed quietly behind her, waiting a few seconds to be sure before turning to Hermione and sighing in relief. "My gods, she is driving me fucking crazy, hovering like I'm going to fall apart at the seams." Hermione snorted and tilted her head. "Yeah, well, enjoy your brief reprieve because I'm pretty sure we have some in the freezer, so she will no doubt be back in a minute." Daphne shook her head confidently. "No, we don't. I made Blaze throw it out for me." Hermione chuckled again and pulled the covers up over Daphne's legs. Sure enough, a few moments later, a perplexed-looking Pansy returned and said she would just nip out and grab some. "Oh, no, don't worry about it then. I just thought if we had some, it would be nice." Daphne waved her off, a cool mask of barely suppressed disappointment in place. "Don't be ridiculous. It won't take me too long, Hermione. Could you stay with her?" Pansy asked with wide doe eyes. "Oh, sure." Hermione shrugged awkwardly. Pansy smiled her appreciation and left them alone once more. "Nicely done. I do actually have a question for you." Hermione trailed off hesitantly. "I was supposed to ask a story about it, but, well, she isn't really up for talking much." That was putting it mildly. She had been exhausted after the small conversation she had had with Hermione the day before. But on the bright side, Blaze had convinced Theo to come home with Daphne and Hermione to get some sleep, and that he would stay with her. It's about Draco's hair." Daphne's face remained blank as she peered back at Hermione. "What about it?" the witch said, clearing her throat and running her fingers through her own hair. "Well, it was mentioned by Jenny that Astoria had said there might be some significance to him growing it and that I should ask Astoria. But, well, there's been a lot going on, and I was wondering if you happen to know why. It's apparently important." Hermione's anxiety around the question rose as Daphne remained silent, just staring at Hermione. Daphne sighed and leaned back into the pillow. "I do." Hermione edged around to sit on the other side of the bed, her back leaning against the footboard. "Why don't you just ask him?" "He changed the subject pretty fast last time I mentioned that he needed a haircut," Hermione explained. Daphne snorted. "Yeah, well, he would. He probably thinks it would have you running for the hills." "What do you mean?" Hermione frowned. "Malfoy men stop cutting their hair when they, for all intents and purposes, are permanently off the market." Hermione blinked at the blonde witch. "What?" "When they meet the single person for which they want to spend their life with, are accounted for, betrothed, intended, whatever you want to call it, that lets the witches know he's off limits. It's an old tradition as far back as the Malfoys have records. A physical representation of their lasting commitment toward a witch. Each Malfoy gets one. Well, except in Draco's case. In fourth year, he was made to start growing it out because of the contract negotiations with my father for Astoria's hand. But neither of them wanted that. Eventually, old Lucy finally listened when Draco told him he would never sleep with her, not even once. So he was allowed to cut it again. You are the person he chose. It's why his parents didn't say anything at that dinner. It's too late." But Hermione tried to process the information being provided to her. She also understood now why Draco probably thought she would run for the hills. He stopped cutting his hair when we arrived. That doesn't even make sense. He's been growing it for months. We only just started dating. Yeah, but it was probably a pretty easy decision for him as soon as you were within the realm of possibility. He's been in love with you since, like, first year. Daphne rolled her eyes. Not that he figured it out until you insinuated that he bought his way on the Quidditch team. He had been so excited that you might notice him if he was playing Quidditch too. Of course, he handled it like a little dweeb, but it's not news to any of us. Daphne smirked as Hermione's mouth hung open in shock. Honestly, have you never wondered why none of us have ever made an attempt to kill you or Ginny? All your other order buddies, sure, but never you two. You would have been dead already if Draco had ever wanted you dead. You two were always our biggest threats. It would have made sense to take you out. If it helps, he's not likely to propose until his hair is past his shoulders anyway. Pansy's words from weeks earlier echoed back in her head. It ain't a game to him. I. Hermione's eyes dropped to her lap as her hands started fidgeting with each other. I'm in love with him, and that scares the shit out of me, because it means giving up a piece of control that he could use to ruin me if he wanted to, Hermione confessed quietly. Daphne hummed in understanding. I'm afraid that is a pretty universal feeling. We all feel that way. But the flip side of that is worth the risk. Besides, I can guarantee that you would be more likely to hurt that man than he would you. I don't think there is a line that he wouldn't cross for you. Hermione snorted. I wasn't aware any of us had any lines left. Daphne shrugged. Maybe not. But if we did, he wouldn't hesitate, not even for a second. You are a much bigger threat to him than he is to you. Hermione frowned at her with an uncomfortable twisting in her stomach of dread. What do you mean? He is well aware that he's going into this, having deeper feelings for you than you have for him. He never imagined a life in which he could exist within the same sphere as you. He had accepted that it would never be, and now you're giving him the possibility of that. If you were to take that away from him, I don't think you understand how much you could hurt him. Don't get me wrong, he's committed to you, but he won't be expecting a wedding and kids anytime soon. He understands you need to catch up first. And there it was. The kick in the guts that made her feel ill. The horror washed over her like ice water. Mercifully, Pansy chose that moment to reappear with the ice cream Hermione knew Daphne didn't really want, but ate gratefully anyways, which allowed Hermione to slip away. There was no other option. She would have to talk to him about it. It was the only fair thing to do. Draco wasn't in the sitting room or the kitchen, so she headed upstairs to his room, hesitating before ultimately letting herself in. But he wasn't in there either. He would come back eventually, she decided, before wearing a hole in his floor with her pacing. Maybe she was overthinking it. Hermione caught sight of her reflection in the mirror and had to mentally slap herself. She would just lie down and wait for him, rest, maybe do some meditation. Except that the dread from earlier still sat like a sinking stone in her stomach, making it impossible for her to still her mind. Her thoughts wouldn't stop racing. She was not ready to get married. They had barely started dating, and despite Daphne's reassurances that she had time before they were at that stage, this all felt so serious now, and one part of one sentence had sent her spiraling. Draco trudged into the room with a yawn and flopped down on the bed, one arm coming to the bend above his head and the other reaching across the mattress to stroke the side of her hip with the back of his fingers. Fucking hell, he mumbled. If you could do me a favor and try to refrain from almost dying in the next few days, that would be greatly appreciated. He joked, letting his eyes fall closed. I could really use a night or two sleep in a bed rather than a chair. He chuckled, and she knew he was trying to make light of the situation. Hermione sat up quickly, crossed her legs, and began biting at the tip of her thumb. Draco immediately rolled onto his side and pulled himself up onto his elbow. Hey, what's wrong? It wouldn't be fair to him to let him get any deeper into this, at least not without all the facts. But those facts terrified her. She wasn't ready for marriage and all that, but she didn't want to lose him either. Even just the thought of it had actual physical ramifications of her chest tightening painfully and her heart pounding. Hermione took a deep breath and scooted around to face him. I need you to know that I can't have kids. She didn't pause for him to even process the confusion that statement brought on. Even if I could, I wouldn't want them. I have seen and done too much in this life and have spent too much time dedicated to everyone else already. I mean, technically speaking, I can get pregnant, but it won't stick. Not ever. It's a cost I agreed to pay. And so I need you to know that before this goes any further. If you want children, then you are wasting your time here. And we should end it now, before we get too invested. She ranted, the words tumbling out of her at such a speed that she wasn't sure if he had even understood any of it. It didn't seem like it by the way he blinked his eyes and jerked his head. Okay, slow down. Where did all this come from? He chuckled, a glint in his eyes as he frowned in amusement. Hermione looked at her lap, not quite sure how to explain it all. I'm just, she sighed, meeting the gaze that was burning on her face in resignation. I'm just saying, before this becomes more than us navigating a new relationship and you growing your hair. Draco stiffened, the playfulness falling from his features. You should know what cards I have to offer. Children aren't one of them, and it's not something I will change my mind about. Hermione bit her lip, nervous about how to tell him the next part. The ritual I performed. Once again, she found herself avoiding eye contact with him as his frown turned more serious. I had to negotiate with Death. He only let Daphne and Astoria go, curse-free, on the agreement that if I ever fall pregnant, he would take it from me. I have never wanted kids anyway, so it wasn't a cost I needed to really think about, but you should know it, in case that's a deal breaker for you. The sunshine shone differently in his room than hers. Her room was flooded with light from the very large French doors, but it was soft. It didn't shine in directly and leave puddles of sunshine creeping slowly across the floor the way his room did. The air felt thicker here in his room in comparison to the fresh, crisp air in hers. So perhaps it was simply that. But right now, the air seemed extra thick as the silence hung between them. Hermione began pulling at her fingers again, waiting for him to tell her that it was, in fact, a deal breaker. That she was right to tell him now, because as much as he wanted her, he wanted Minnie Malfoy's more. His fingers reached out, curling under her chin and tilting her face up to look at him. His passive features, as if she had told him that she wanted a pygmy puff, were not what she had expected. Who told you? He asked with a raised eyebrow. What? About the hair, love, he reiterated with a roll of his eyes. That depends. Hermione shook her head, trying to regain her focus. Did you listen to what I said about the rest of it? Draco shrugged. You don't want kids, so you made a deal with Death. And now you can't have them. It's fine. I was always happy to let the Malfoy line die with me anyways. We can always get a dog should the need for a life dependent on us arise. He waved it off with such flippant dismissal that an overwhelming sense of warmth washed over her. Now, who told you? Hermione's face pulled into a beaming expression that made her feel aglow. She shifted onto her knees, kneeling over him and pressing her lips to his passionately. Draco rolled onto his back, taking her with him, his hands sliding up to clutch her on either side of her waist. She allowed the kiss to deepen as her emotions flowed through her and into him. Hermione pulled away before they could get too engrossed in it, placing a few quick, soft kisses on his lips. Daphne, but you're not allowed to be mad at her because she died and all of that. Also, she only told me because I asked after Ginny told me that Astoria might have mentioned something, but she also died and isn't much up to talking currently, so Draco brushed a strand of her hair behind her ear, causing some butterflies to resurface. Bunch of meddlesome fools, he grumbled. Well, you are taking your sweet time, Hermione teased playfully. Draco cocked an eyebrow at her. Oh, really? He rolled them over so that her body was trapped beneath his. Because you were much better. His fingertips moved to her side and tickled her, pulling a shriek from her. followed by a series of giggles as she squirmed and tried to get away. His fingers settled, and she couldn't help but look at him in adoration. She didn't give a fuck what Daphne said. Draco was a much greater threat to emotional annihilation than she was. The way his gray eyes looked down at her with a twinkle from his smile. Yeah, she was screwed. She never had a chance. Hermione had doubted she would have ever fallen in love because, reluctantly, she had to admit that her earlier assessment of stumbling had been wrong. But when she did, it seemed she fell hard. I don't want you to say anything, but there's something else I think you should probably know. She swallowed and tried to still the vulnerability. She continued before she could let him get the wrong idea and start panicking the way she was internally. I love you, Draco Malfoy.